Writer's Block with Miriam Kilmurry. Featured book, Tehran Calling. Hello everybody, my name is Miriam Kilmurry and this is Writer's Block. Writer's Block was started a couple of months ago during COVID, and I suppose like a lot of other people, I found myself out of work, in lockdown, and having to keep creative. My big love, of course, is singing and books, novels, literature of all kinds. So that's what this show is about. And I've already had some wonderful guests on the show. I'm absolutely delighted to have had various people like Nicola Cassidy, Kate O'Toole. But now I have to actually talk about my own. It's very humbling, my own books. And something that, well, you have to be very honest when you're talking about your own work. Always wanted to write. I always wanted to write. I never really got over the fear of writing until I suppose I started working with the Open University. I was already a singer, but I came as an educating Rita type person to academia. I loved school when I was young, but I never really found school particularly easy, partly because we were always away. In part because we changed schools so many times, my sister and myself. We were jumping from one denomination school to another denomination school as well. And there was a lot of adjustment. So you always came in the middle of a curriculum somewhere. But still, in all the different schools and in all the different countries, no matter where we were, I loved literature and I loved music and I loved drama. It always stayed with me. And I also loved it from the perspective of the church as well. You know, you had the liturgy in the church. And I always found the stories very, very fascinating. And I had a great and very vivid imagination. I could make it work for me. And that really helps you as a singer too. You know, you enter the song and you inhabit the character, and you bring that through in your voice. However, when I did Shakespeare text and performance, which was on my bachelor's degree, it was the most wonderful course. It was a course that totally removed the fear of Shakespeare. And I don't know why I had a fear of Shakespeare. I think a lot of people sometimes do have a fear of Shakespeare because they see RP accents, received pronunciation accents, being used to present Shakespearean plays. And they don't often go to the productions where, you know, a Dublinese accent is used, or a Bronx accent, or something, some quite normal everyday accent is in use, which actually would be much more down Shakespeare's street. That's what he would have loved. And even when I played Lady Macbeth, I still had this residual fear. And that was the thing that actually prompted me to perhaps go down the route of being an educating Rita, and at 33 years of age, back quite some time ago now, start taking books, novels, and texts more seriously. I was well used to doing that on stage in musicals and in plays. And of course, a poem is a song. A song is a poem. It is a text. You can approach it from all kinds of different ways, but they are based, songs and poems are interchangeable. So I had the nous already. I knew where I wanted to go, but now would I have the actual courage to put pen to paper myself? And sometimes you need to kick up the backside to do that, you know, and that came in a variety of different ways. So there we are. We're kind of now very much thinking about pursuing a career in writing, but still the music kind of and teaching as well, and language. My fallback career was English language teaching and executive language coaching. So you approach texts all the time when you're in that line of work with adults too. You look at their business text. You look at the text that's being used to train them up, and you have to analyze the text, and then you have to make it a lot more amenable for them. So again, all of this play is going on, and I thought, come on, you have just got to get going. What is it that you really want to write about? What is it that has stayed with you all through your life? And I began to have a few ideas and wrote various paragraphs of different stories, plays, all kinds of things that never really took off. And then a life-changing event. My mother's Alzheimer's, my father's heartbreak, him then suddenly dying before her, and her then dying of a tragic accident in her nursing home. She died from her injuries. And I think that was the catalyst to just say, come on, just do it. They'd be proud of you. That's what they would want you to do. Stop with all this stopping and starting and just move on and do it. Life is short. Just do it. So that is pretty much what happened. Within about 3 months of my mother's death, I was already, if you like, channeling the grief into writing texts. And then I felt that in my own heart of hearts, I was remembering when our family was together in all senses of the word. My family was probably more together when they were outside the country than when they were home. My father was, he started his career in the Merchant Navy as a radio officer. Radio officers were poached into Aer Lingus when Aer Lingus got off the ground in 1960. And then he did 14 years with them and then started flying internationally on a more regular basis with different crews. He worked for Guinness Peat Aviation, Air Tara, different companies like that. So we were traveling with him quite a bit, more than even some of our relations realized, because we didn't always see them that much. And if the way it worked in those days, if your company supplied crew, supplied an aircraft, they would supply the crew as well. And they were called wet leases. Dry leases was only when the aircraft was sent to a country in Africa, in the Middle East, in Japan, in the Far East. So we got, after the first 6 months that they were away, we got to travel with him. And it was great and it was exciting. And the truth of the matter was, you were awakened to a lot of things. You had a great education, because although you were in the protected bubble of having your family with you, you still saw a lot. You still learned a lot. Kids are no fools. They see through everything. You know, they absorb everything like a sponge. Now, the book that you see just here behind me is Tehran Calling, A True Story. That was the period in my family's life when we were most together, and a time that actually stayed with me all the way through my life. It's 40 years now since I was there, but 40 years on, it touches my heart. It affects my life. And it is definitely when my family and myself were kind of at our best. So Tehran Calling, it's a true story. I have fictionalized the beginning. So you have the story of a young teenage girl, Misha, myself, who is traveling out to join her father with her mother and her younger 9-year-old sister. It's a very exciting time. She has lots of favorites in her life. Her favorite actress is Farrah Fawcett-Majors. She's very interested in the fact that Farah Pahlavi, the Empress of Iran, Farah Pahlavi is beautiful. She has the same name. It's just spelt a little bit differently. And Miriam at this stage is also changing. She's 12 years old. She's just made her confirmation in the Catholic Church. And the first thing she realized was that she couldn't get anything to fit her. So adult clothes had to be bought for her to attend the ceremony. She jumped from the age of 11 to 12 to being the size of an adult. And in fact, you can get some idea here from, if you have a look here at, I have a green screen behind me. I hope you can work it out here. I'm trying to work it out. Where am I? You have myself here, practically the size of my mother. I'm 13 in that photo. And then my 9-year-old sister, and then my mother. My father is featured. This is the photo from his ID card for Tehran airport. So that's what he actually looked like at the time that this is all taking place. The stamps are real stamps as well. They've not been made up by some publicist or anything like that. They are stamps that I brought home. We've lots of mementos from the time. We've got clothes. We've got all sorts of things that you could take out of the country and fly home in the belly of the plane. That wouldn't normally happen today. So the aircraft that my father looked after was a very famous aircraft. It was called Mike Whiskey. That was the name of the aircraft. He had actually worked on this aircraft in Dublin in Aer Lingus for many, many years. Then it was sold off and used as a charter out to different airlines. And he found himself back working on the aircraft years after he'd first worked on it in Iran. So on this occasion, we fly out and we are aware, because my uncle lives in Iran, we are aware that in the south, in Awaz and in places like Qom, there's trouble. But none of this is hitting the international news. None of it. And so my mother has flown out at one point to see her brother and came back and said, oh, everything's fine. She was aware of a little bit of trouble. And then when we go out, we feel more reassured about that, because my mother came back with a really positive impression of southern Iran, which is quite Arab. Generally speaking, Iran isn't an Arab country. It wouldn't be classed as an Arab country, but there are different ethnic groups there. And in the part she was in, it would have had quite a lot of Arabs. She didn't actually have a chance to go up north to the capital, Tehran, which is beautiful. It's surrounded by absolutely beautiful mountains, snow-capped mountains, where the water comes straight from the mountains and through your taps, in your apartments, in your houses. The fountains, that's all water straight from the snow-capped mountains. And I think the beauty of the place, it was modeled on Paris. It was so cosmopolitan and a joy to be in. We really didn't expect or see very much of a problem in the first 3 months that we were there. So we flew out in May 1978. May was great, June, July. Then came August. My birthday was the 3rd of August. I turned 13. And in fact, in that photograph behind, we're at I think it was the Azadi Stadium, which was specially built for some big games at the time. And there was a football match going on the day of my birthday. And of course, my father took a day off and brought me to a football match for my birthday. So it's just as well I was into football. And if I was ever going to be into football, it would be because of things like that. So we enjoyed it very much and we had a fantastic time. And then the trouble started. And when it started with a vengeance. It became instantly a very violent environment. Still, this was not hitting the news in August 1978. That didn't happen for another couple of months. So the story really is about how my mother, my sister, and myself experienced the early stages of revolution in Iran and our escape, which was really very difficult. It involved a lot of people having to get us out. We went at about 4 o'clock in the morning to the airport. Hopefully we would get out. It didn't happen. I was separated from my mother. My sister was separated from my mother, all of us in separate rooms. We were interrogated. Things were flown at us. We were shouted at, screamed at. We weren't getting out of there. My father was staff and he was out on the other side. He was at the aircraft wondering why we hadn't come through. It got very, very difficult. His boss, thankfully, Leo Balance, allowed my father time off to go and pursue some way of getting us out, and that's what our story, our part of the story is, which I won't ruin for you now, but it was very terrifying. And I suppose you might say, well, maybe, has this one has written the story, has she watched Argo or something like that? Believe it or not, I couldn't bring myself to watch the movie Argo. It was produced by Ben Affleck, and a host of wonderful stars in it who did great justice to the story. But we couldn't really totally agree with some of the statements about the Shah in the first 5 minutes of the program, because it wasn't really in our experience. That was quite hard hitting. But the rest of the film, if you take the first 5 minutes away, the rest of the film was absolutely as it was. Absolutely. The atmosphere that we experienced, the locations that were chosen that were so similar to Iran. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And that airport scene. Oh, I tell you, George Clooney and Ben Affleck really nailed it. Absolutely fantastic. The way they portrayed the scene, and the feel, and almost the taste of the country itself. The air, you can nearly taste Iran. Excellent work. So I loved the film, absolutely loved the film. Just that 5 minutes didn't quite fit the average person's experience, even when they were there during the revolution. There were different feelings about the Shah and the Empress's work, which was the White Revolution, which was what they were really trying to bring Iran into a more democratic phase of its history. And they had brought the marrying age from 12 up to 18, which was highly controversial in the eyes of most of the mullahs. And also you have to remember that the Shah and the Empress, the Shah and the Shah Banu did not have full power. They did not have full control. It was other power groups. Other power groups had control. And they were constantly fighting that. And it was a far more complex situation than the Western rewrite tends to make it out to be. And certainly we felt that when we were there, and I felt it. And I was, as I say, a teenager. But a teenager that was being married off all the time, and dowries being discussed and all kinds of stuff. I really wanted to run at times. But the Iranians were beautiful, beautiful people. And very, very educated, and very, the American educational system was actually quite, the desirable one for them. And then the only other option then would be France. France was super important to Iran. And most of the kids that I met, they were either going to the States, they were either heading off to Los Angeles, or they were heading off to Paris to complete their degrees. It's very interesting people that I met. And when we eventually got on that aircraft, we had to leave my father behind. He couldn't leave with us. And there was complete radio silence for approximately 3 months. We did not know if he was alive or dead. It was really terrifying. My uncle also, in the meantime, got out as well. He just had to cut his losses because where he was in the south was very dangerous, and had been for quite some time. But he got home. My father's experience, my father's story of getting out, that I tell as a whole story in itself. So in some ways, this book is part one, my mother, my sister, and myself. And part two, my father left behind, what he went through and how he escaped. And you see, after my mother's death, she was the second parent, of course, to pass. It struck me that we were blasé about this story. It was part of our life, didn't think too much about it. But in fact, for an Irish family to have not just one, but two escapes from Iran was very unusual. So it was one reason why I had to tell the story, because That would have been, quite a story for most people. The second reason I wrote the book was when I would do workshops with 20 to 30-year-olds, I became aware that they only knew the story of the Iranian Revolution through either a little bit of history that they might have done at school, usually when they were studying President Carter and his administration. And so the rescuing of the hostages was glazed over. Or they had watched the movie Argo, which was only made in the last 8 years. They did not understand the implications of that revolution and what it set off in the Middle East. So when I realized that was that we now had a generation who didn't remember what happened, I knew I had to. That was the third reason why I had to write it. From a book production point of view, I find it very difficult to cut the apron strings or the umbilical cord on the text once it's written and once the drafts have all been gone through and are okayed. I like to self-publish, and I've pretty much got to know the industry now. I'm writing from a vocational point of view. I know how to make it work for me now. It is my passion. It is something that I need more of. And when that's the case, you have to do it and not waste time. Having said that, there is a time for everything, but you'll know when you're ready to write the story. You'll know when it comes together, and you'll also feel the prompts. With regard to a memoir, you see, this is biofictional in the sense that I have fictionalized the beginning. Because, of course, since my escape from Iran, I have not been back. It's been impossible to go back. And actually, I've been in contact with Empress Farah Pahlavi, a lovely woman. She has emailed me and she's written me letters, and she has my book. And she is she's constantly reaching out to her own people. She's very approachable, very well, very healthy, and her crown prince son is his life really now is about his concern for this country. And of course, he was 18. He was actually out of the country when I think it was the 2nd of January, the same day my father escaped. 2nd of January 1979 is when Dad got out. They all escaped on the same day, not together, but at the same time, same day. But the young crown prince was already in America. I think he was with the Air Force at the time. So it was, for me, it was a very encouraging moment when she got back to me and got behind the project, and made me feel that I'd done the right thing. This was supposed to happen. I had a little rubber stamp there, and I was delighted. But in writing the book, I heard this voice constantly saying, okay, right, you have fictionalized, you've had to frame, this is more in the writer's block sort of vein of going about the writing of the book. There were certain things that had to happen. Yes, I wrote the story, but I did have to amalgamate certain characters into one, either because I couldn't contact them or because they had died. After 40 years, that's going to happen. So you had that situation. Also, I had to fictionalize returning. Now, the Shabanu, Farah Pahlavi, the Empress Farah Pahlavi, she hopes to go back one day. Her family hope to go back one day. It's a hope, it's an aspiration. I hope to go back one day. And I have said, I'll go back when you go back. That's been my attitude. Because the place is just so beautiful. I can't highlight that enough. But I had to keep true to the voice in my head that says, you've got to now fictionalize the beginning, fictionalize the ending, but that middle part, which is the story, that has got to be honest and true. Now, Everybody experiences stories from different perspectives. Your point of view on an event that we might share together will be slightly different to mine. And maybe 15, 20 years down the line, we will remember it a little bit differently. It's what happens. It's quite normal. So I have done, in the most, I suppose, soul-searching and honest way possible, I have done my best to bring to this text the truth of what I remember. And yes, it was very cathartic, and it was a great way to channel the grief as well of losing both parents, in 3 years of each other. I suppose it was a moment in our history where we actually started to see our parents as adults and not just parents. For me, that was the case. My memories are very, very vivid of our time away and also our time living in Nigeria. And some people would say, oh, it's a very bad thing for parents to take their kids out of school, that it's disruptive to the family. Well, look, in my experience, there were two types of people. There were people who were very concerned about the welfare of their kids, etc., and very wound up over that. And then you had those who really wanted to lead the dual life. Without a doubt, there were men who didn't want their families to come out because they were kind of involved with somebody else, or maybe they had a slightly alternative lifestyle. That is life. And if you don't allow your kids to experience those things from the safety of the bubble that is the family, where they can ask questions, where they know that they are safe, you're depriving them of an education. Now, when I later migrated and had all kinds of other different experiences, if things got rough, if things got difficult, because of the experiences I'd had with my family abroad, I knew who to go to for help, the most likely ports of call, who would maybe give me overnight accommodation, who would be totally trustworthy. I knew where to go. I had a sense of what would work for me because I had all of these experiences. So my advice to people who are wondering about whether or not they should take their kids out of school, don't worry about that. Kids catch up. What you're doing now is giving them character-forming experiences. That is so important. Cannot highlight that enough. Once they're with you, once they see you happy, once they feel confident in the group, you're actually enabling them to be able, later on in life, to travel the world, feel confident, and really, really thrive in their environment. Everything else you can catch up with. It might seem bad at the time, but no, you can catch up with everything. I lived in about 50 different places when I was a child. I went to about 13 different schools. Sometimes I was in primary schools that were Catholic, sometimes they were Quaker, Great experience. You found out what you gravitated towards, and you learned how to deal with people. And that in turn has fed into my writing. And what I want to bring to my writing is that kind of experience where you look at the person and you've got the richness of that tapestry that has been cultivated in you from your childhood. Never underestimate the power of childhood, the experiences of childhood. Allow your kids to experience as much as possible under your guidance. The best education you can give them is that. Everything balances out in the end. Don't start panicking over things. Truly, it does balance out. So, with a little bit of tweaking here and there, because this was a complete departure from my first book, which was this one here, just behind me here, That was my master's thesis, which was a defense of Francis Ledwidge, the Irish World War One poet, as I've defended him as being. He was always regarded as a pastoral poet in Ireland, and Ireland over the 70, 80 years since his death never really credited him with full honours as a war poet. We didn't do that. It was seen as British, you know. And yet he created hybrid poetry written from front lines in Egypt, in France, in Gallipoli. He was killed in action, 29 years of age, blown to bits by a mortar shell. But my goodness, did he write from front lines. And he was so lucid. He didn't have shell shock. He seemed to be able to write. The worse the fighting got around him, the noise got around him, he was still able to produce the most astounding poetry. He was fighting for the rights of small nations. He was moving in circles that were quite extraordinary for a rather modest chap who came from 15 minutes down the road from me here. I live in Drogheda. And he was from Slane, only minutes down the road. And I had to write his story. In 2011, if you Googled Francis Ledwidge as a war poet, nothing would come up. Nothing to do with war poetry in him. Now it's everywhere. In the meantime, we've had the celebration of the 1916 Rising. We had the Queen visit as well in 2011, I think it was. And we've also had the First World War celebrations. And I got the message out there, thank God, very early in 2013 about this thesis and this book, and gave talks all around the place. My little contribution, but one that I'm proud of. And I'm not the only one. Absolutely not the only one. So the next, if I can just pull myself out of the way here, I was a Bunratty Castle entertainer. I'm a singer, and I was a Bunratty Castle entertainer for 4 years. And a couple of those seasons I spent in a place called Kinvara in County Galway. Absolutely the most beautiful Brigadoon style of little town. And not so little now, I can tell you. And in a peninsula stretching right out into Galway Bay, in the town, but on the seafront, going straight out on a peninsula, you have this very beautiful castle, which was King Gura's castle. King Gura was a famous king in the area. And on this site was built this castle as well. The show there takes place on 3 levels, and most of us who were actors as well as singers, the actors, singers, they were sent up to this castle, and you performed the works of John Millington Synge, Sean O'Casey, W.B. Yeats. Great fun. Takes about 80 people, the smaller of the banqueting centres, but the most difficult show. And you have to carry it. And I loved it there. I also loved Bunratty, which is the big flagship castle, which I was in as well. But this was a wonderful place. So Murder and Mead is a crime novel due out on the 8th of October. Mead, of course, is the drink that you have in the castle. We've got them right the way through the castles. And this is based on my experiences. Now, it's not a tell-all, but it is based on the experience of living in entertainers' accommodation, doing 2 shows a night, 6 nights a week, 9 months of the year, perhaps getting tours then after that. And, you know, it was very, very much the equivalent of rep for us singers at the time. And you never fully, the very young ones who were doing this job never fully appreciated until they were much older, the experience that this gave them. And you never knew who was going to walk in your door. It could be film stars, athletes, Harvard and Yale. The entire universities of Harvard and Yale in one banqueting hall is something you'll never forget, you know. Celebrity golf banquets. We had Murder, She Wrote. Robert Loggia. We had all kinds of different people. Loads of people would just suddenly appear or book the place out. So wonderful. I mean, it was a weird experience having people come to you in that way from abroad, but they did. And I always found that the celebrity banquets, particularly with the big stars, were the easiest ones of all because they are totally with you. They've been there. They're on your side. They were always amazed at the show. They expected it to be kind of like the Beefeater in London, but it wasn't. It's a different kind of show again, um, where you are much more on show and you are carrying everything. And they were always amazed. I remember a very famous political presenter called Brian Farrell, who came with Gabriel Byrne's mother one night, the actor Gabriel Byrne's mother, for the Irish Heart Foundation show, banqueting fundraising show that we had. And he could not believe what he was seeing. He could not believe what the entertainers were doing. And I was really surprised that he was so supportive, because this was the guy who was terrifying on RTE television. He was the Jeremy Paxman of Irish television. And he was so supportive. And it turns out he had been an actor well before he was a television presenter and political correspondent. So there were people who you got to know in interesting ways, and it was a great time in my life. And I had been a soloist before that, but I was really glad I did 4 years in Bunratty Castle, because that cemented my ability to deal with audiences. And also, you were dealing in texts, medieval texts, all the time. We had attacks also that happened, people getting knifed in the castle, all kinds of stuff like that. So I mean, there's the stuff that I can bring into the stories in different ways. And then after that, I was a jazz singer for many years. I was in musical theatre and in jazz. And jazz became a bigger thing for me after a while. But still, what are you doing? You're interpreting texts. You're working with texts. It's all about the text, and everything is in the text. So you should never really worry about writer's block from that perspective. Even if you feel that nothing is coming, you're not, the juices aren't flowing when it comes to the story you're writing right now, switch to a different kind of text. A song, a poem, a movie. And then go off and do something completely different. Totally change the chip. Go out and do something hugely practical, the gardening, go shopping, anything. Spend a good long time doing that, and your brain will reset itself and you will have inspiration again. That is how it works whenever the brain is challenged with something. When you've considered it, when you've given it as much time as you can, then go and do something with your hands, very creative, totally practical. And the inspiration will then come back. It's just how it works. It's just how it works. And it works that way for everybody, really. So that's my story. That was my book, my featured book on writer's block. You probably know a little bit too much about me now, but I'm very happy to have shared this book with everybody. I'm so delighted I wrote it now. It's my tribute to my parents. I'm so grateful to my mother. My mother was a wonderful painter, absolutely wonderful, wonderful painter. I still have all her paintings here. In Ireland, you can become state registered. To become a state registered artist is a very big thing. And I don't think we have anything quite like that anywhere else in the world. A few similar things, perhaps in the States, but not the kind of system that we have in Ireland. So I was really fortunate that I inherited a lot from her. And then with my father, I inherited his itchy feet, his need to be with groups. He was a man's man. He loved being with his team. And although I can take myself off and be very much the recluse, I love quarantine from that point. The lockdown is great from that perspective, because it gives me all kinds of excuses to go and do the things I've been putting off for a while and write loads of stuff. But I love being with people, and I love teamwork too. So balance. That's what we're trying to get back. What are we in right now? As I'm recording this, I think we're in week 19. To be honest, I've lost track. And there are books that are inspirational. And in fact, there is one here that I'm going to do a wee talk on a little bit later. And it's called Shattered Love. This has kept me sane over the last 19 weeks. It is very much, I know it's the biography of Richard Chamberlain, but it is not a biography that you will expect. It is most definitely showing you how to be on your own, showing you how to love yourself, finding inspiration and the divine in the moment. And I think for a lot of people in COVID-19, which is when I'm filming this, they'll have got to a point 19 weeks in where they're very tired. They were very scared at the beginning. They then started to feel very good about themselves because they were actually creating a blueprint for themselves to live through this mess. And now the penny's dropping with a lot of people that, oh, we are in for the long haul. Although some countries are opening up, our numbers also started to peak here again. So that had to be got under control. Now, in that kind of situation, you have to learn how to confront yourself. And that's where this gentleman goes. And it is a very unusual book. And that for me was very, very useful. I suppose telling a story comes fairly naturally to the Irish. We're great storytellers. I suppose as well, connecting that directly to the divine, to appreciating the person in front of you, that all feeds in. What we have now is a problem where we cannot connect with the people that we want to connect with in the same way. And we're struggling there. We have to write this blueprint. This is where good old-fashioned letter writing, this is where falling back on your reading can really educate you. So don't, if possible, don't go down the social media route totally. Pick up a book, write a book, get back reading, make reading your friend. Make it your friend. So one of the things I used to say to students is, you know, okay, you might hate French. You hate that subject. French is your friend. Make it your friend. Have a relationship with that. Start to change your thinking towards it. I'm going to leave you now because I know there are people out there who have far more interesting things to say than I do. But write your story if you are compelled to do that. Don't let anything block you. Don't let anybody block you. Don't let any teacher, don't let any influencer block you. Go ahead and do this. Celebrate yourself. Get to know your story. You'll get great perspective on you, on who you are. Very important to do right now. We've got the time to do it, so why not? Why not? I will love you and leave you. Thank you so much for listening to me. Hope it hasn't been too boring for you. I have plenty more in the pipeline from a writing perspective, and I will also keep the singing going too. And you know, you do your best to just make sure your talents keep you going at this time. It's a difficult time, but we are all in it together. It doesn't matter how old you are, how successful you are. We're all in it together. What we mustn't do is go to ground. I think that's bad. We've got to keep finding new ways to celebrate each other, new ways to keep in contact with each other. And as I say, take the time to write if you are inspired to do it. So I want to give a big shout out to young authors out there. But even if you're an oldie like myself and you've never done this before, do it now. Do it now. You've got stuff to share. You've got lessons that you can teach people. And I will love you and leave you. Thank you for listening. This is Miriam Kilmurry on Writer's